By 1962, the most famous woman on Earth was being torn apart by the very machine that had built her. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just losing roles, she was being erased, betrayed, laughed at, branded crazy and unreliable. She had no allies left in Hollywood. Not the producers, not the directors, not even the press. Except one man. When Fox Studios fired Marilyn Monroe, they thought it was just business. They thought the movie would go on without her. What they didn't count on was Dean Martin. Cool, calculated, untouchable Dean Martin, Hollywood's most bankable leading man, took one look at what they did and said 4 words that brought a $400 million empire to its knees. Words that would make headlines. Words that no one in Hollywood had the guts to say. No Marilyn. No picture. But why would Dean Martin, a man with everything to lose, go to war with the most powerful studio in the world, all for a woman the world had already abandoned? The answer will change the way you see both of them forever. The summer of 1962 was scorching in Los Angeles, but inside the executive suites at 20th Century Fox, the temperature dropped to ice. Behind closed doors, the men in suits weren't just crunching numbers, they were sharpening knives. Fox was in crisis mode. Cleopatra, their pride and joy, was bleeding them dry. The budget had exploded from $2 million to a mind-melting $44 million. Elizabeth Taylor was sick. The production was cursed. Investors were panicking. Shareholders were furious. And someone needed to pay. But they couldn't touch Elizabeth Taylor. She was still filming across the ocean in Rome, and she was far too powerful to fire. So, the studio looked closer to home. And there she was, Marilyn Monroe. Aging, anxious, exhausted, an easy target. Never mind that Marilyn had helped build the studio's golden age. Never mind that her face had been on every magazine cover from here to Paris. To the boardroom boys, she wasn't an icon anymore. She was a liability. They didn't see a woman battling depression. They didn't care about the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, or the dependency on sleeping pills just to survive another day. They saw a crumbling star and an opportunity. Their plan was simple. Fire Marilyn publicly, sue her into bankruptcy, and spin it all as her fault. End quote. Unprofessional, end quote, difficult, end quote, out of control, end quote. They and Oppos, defeed the gossip columns. Destroy her reputation. Wipe their hands clean. They thought they held all the cards, lawyers, money, media. But they forgot one detail. They forgot who was standing in Marilyn's corner. And that was a mistake they'd come to regret. Fox Studios thought they were untouchable. They believed Marilyn Monroe was replaceable, a fading star who could be swapped out like a worn costume. So when they fired her, they didn't blink. They didn't hesitate. They released a brutal press statement, accused her of breach of contract, and filed a $750,000 lawsuit meant to crush her spirit and destroy her finances. Then they moved on. They cast Lee Remick, a young, talented, professional actress who, by all accounts, was everything Marilyn supposedly wasn't. They announced the change with confidence, refitted the costumes, reset the lights. They even started prepping the next round of press to spin the story. One problem, they forgot to call Dean Martin. To them, Dean was just the male lead, a name on the poster. Surely he'd be thrilled to finish the film with a reliable co-star. Why wouldn't he be? Because they never read the fine print. Dean Martin, the king of cool, wasn't just attached to Something's Got to Give. He was contractually bound to Marilyn Monroe, specifically. His deal included full co-star approval, a clause that gave him the final say on who played opposite him. And he had approved Marilyn. Only Marilyn. That one overlooked clause would soon bring the entire production crashing down. Because Dean wasn't about to let them erase her without a fight. Dean Martin wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. The moment the news broke, Marilyn was out, Lee Remick was in. Dean didn't call his agent. He didn't issue a public statement. He simply lit a cigarette, put on his best suit, and drove straight to the Fox lot alone. No entourage, no lawyers, no noise. He walked through the very gates where Marilyn had just been banned, past the sound stages, past the posters with her face still hanging in the breeze, and straight into the office of Peter LeVay's, head of production. The room was buzzing, assistants, executives, lawyers running damage control. They thought Dean was there to get his new shooting schedule. Dean, LeVay's beamed, extending his hand. Crazy week, huh? But don't worry, we got Lee Remick. She's a pro. We'll knock this picture out in 6 weeks. Dean didn't smile. He didn't shake his hand. He just stood there and said 6 calm, devastating words. I signed to work with Marilyn Monroe. Levades chuckled nervously. Dina, she's gone. She broke the contract. We had to move on. It's business, you understand. Dean didn't flinch. Didn't blink. My contract says I have co-star approval, he said quietly. I approved Marilyn. No one else. The room froze. Lawyers exchanged panicked glances. That clause was real, but they never imagined Dean would enforce it. Not over this. Not when millions were on the line. Levades tried again. Dean, with all due respect, Marilyn's unstable. She's sick. This isn't personal, it's professional. Dean leaned in. I respect Miss Remick. She's talented. But I signed to do this film with Marilyn Monroe. I will do it with her. Or I will not do it at all. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. For words echoed behind him like a warning shot across the studio lot. No Marilyn. No picture. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. Hollywood expected a meltdown. A press conference. Lawyers. A war of egos played out across gossip columns. Instead, Dean Martin vanished. No rebuttals. No rebuttal. No press tours. Just silence. And a golf club membership that suddenly got a lot of use. When reporters found him on the 9th hole and shoved microphones in his face, hoping for fireworks, all he'd say was, I got a contract, pal. I work with Marilyn. That was it. That was the statement. No drama. No shouting. Just calm, quiet defiance. And it wrecked Fox. They'd already replaced Marilyn. They had already spun the press. They thought they were in control. But now, with Dean refusing to show up, the entire production collapsed in on itself. The lights on the soundstage were shut off. Crew members were sent home. Distributors who had pre-purchased the film, specifically because of the names Dean Martin and Marilyn Monroe, started pulling out. Without both stars, Something's Got to Give wasn't a movie anymore. It was just a contract dispute attached to a dying script. Fox scrambled. They threatened Dean with a $5.6 million lawsuit for breach of contract. They called him unprofessional, ungrateful, a diva. They even floated the idea of recasting the male lead entirely, starting the movie from scratch. But none of it mattered, because Dean Martin wasn't playing their game. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even negotiating. He was golfing. And every day he stayed off set, Fox bled more money. Cleopatra was still devouring their budget, and now Something's Got to Give, their supposed, end quote, quick win, end quote, was going nowhere. The studio had tried to crush Marilyn Monroe. Now Dean Martin was quietly crushing them. And the worst part for Fox? He wasn't even trying. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Fox Studios had expected obedience, submission, fear. Instead, they got Dean Martin, silent, immovable, and unbothered. Weeks dragged on. Every day, without filming, cost them thousands. Cleopatra was still hemorrhaging money. Distributors were furious. Shareholders wanted blood. And the one movie that was supposed to save them was frozen in place by 4 little words. No Marilyn. No picture. Finally, the pressure cracked them open. The same men who had publicly humiliated Marilyn Monroe now did the one thing they swore they'd never do. They crawled back. They dropped the lawsuit. They offered to rehire her. Not just rehire, they offered her a raise. From $100,000 to $250,000. $250,000 to come back to the studio that had tried to destroy her. And it didn't stop there. They fired George Cukor, the director who had bullied her on set. Replaced him with Jean Negulesco, someone Marilyn trusted and respected. They promised a fresh start. A clean slate. It was a full surrender. All because one man refused to be bought. All because Dean Martin stood his ground. And when Marilyn heard the news, she broke down. Tears. Relief. Validation. After months of whispers, betrayal, and isolation, she finally felt wanted. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't washed up. She wasn't finished. She was Marilyn Monroe. And the most powerful studio in Hollywood had just begged for her return. She gave glowing interviews to Life magazine, smiling in photos, radiating hope. For the first time in a long time, she looked like she believed in tomorrow. And when friends asked what had changed, she said just 5 words. Dean did this. For me. The lights were coming back on. Scripts were being rewritten. Sets were dusted off. Wardrobe fittings resumed. Marilyn was back, officially. And so was Dean, smiling quietly on the sidelines, waiting patiently to begin again. Filming for Something's Gotta Give was scheduled to resume in October. But Hollywood is a place of illusions. A fresh contract can't undo months of humiliation. A bigger paycheck can't erase trauma. And sometimes, even loyalty isn't enough to pull someone back from the edge. The truth was, Marilyn Monroe had been unraveling long before the studio pulled the trigger. The drugs, the insomnia, the abandonment, the years of being used, misunderstood, discarded. It all sank into her like poison, deeper than anyone realized. On August 5, 1962, just weeks before filming was set to begin, Dean Martin's phone rang. The voice on the other end was quiet. Shaken, Marilyn was gone. An overdose. Alone in her Brentwood bedroom. Just 36 years old. The headlines blared. The press speculated. But Dean said nothing. No statements. No spin. No interviews about what a tragedy it was for the arts. He didn't want attention. He wanted silence. Space to grieve. Because to Dean, this wasn't about fame or failure. It was about a friend. The only man who'd stood by her when the rest of the industry threw her away had just lost her for good. Production on Something's Gotta Give was shut down permanently. The footage, what little existed, was locked away for decades. A ghost of a movie haunting Hollywood history. But in that footage, something beautiful lingers. You see Marilyn, laughing, glowing, alive. You see Dean watching her, not with lust or pity, but with warmth, with respect, with quiet, genuine care. You see a woman who, for a fleeting moment, felt safe. And a man who had given her that feeling, not because he had to, but because no one else would. Years passed. The studio recovered. New stars rose. The headlines moved on. But those who were there never forgot what Dean Martin did, not because he made noise, but because he refused to. In a town where loyalty was just a line in a contract, Dean made it real. He didn't defend Marilyn Monroe for attention. He didn't turn her tragedy into a branding opportunity. He didn't sell his grief to the tabloids. He just kept going. Quiet, steady, loyal. And when asked, years later, why he walked away from a fortune just to make a point, Dean shrugged. "She was my friend, pal," he said. "What else was I going to do?" That answer said everything. Because in a city built on image, Dean Martin was the rarest thing of all, real. No press tours, no memoir confessions, just a golf course, a cigarette, and a memory he never let anyone twist. Today, Something's Got to Give remains one of the most famous unfinished films in history. But maybe that's how it was meant to be. A story that stopped in its tracks, frozen in time. A love letter between two broken people who found something genuine, if only for a moment. You can still find the footage. You can still see Marilyn smile. You can still see the way Dean looks at her. Not as a co-star, not as a symbol, but as someone worth standing up for. In the end, Marilyn Monroe didn't die completely forgotten, because one man refused to let her be erased. And that's not just the story of a movie that never got made. That's the story of Dean Martin. Not just a celebrity, a legend.